Dear colleagues, vaginitis is one of the most common reasons for women to seek medical help. Aerobic vaginitis is a form of non-specific vaginitis characterized by vaginal inflammation, increased numbers of leukocytes and parabasal cells, and proportional decrease of lactobacilli in a vaginal smear. The diagnosis is based on wet mount microscopy, and that is subjective. In order to evaluate vaginal microbiota of women with microscopic signs of aerobic vaginitis, we analyzed 333 vaginal samples by means of real-time PCR. We used the commercial Femaflor kit produced by DNA Technology Russia. The kit allows us to produce 16 groups of vaginal bacteria, lactobacillus species, facultative, gram-positive and gram-negative anaerobes, obligate anaerobes, including Gardnerella vaginalis and Etopobium vagina, mycoplasmas, and yeast-like fungi. Once the amplification is over, the special software was used to automatically calculate the total bacterial load and the proportion of particular species and groups of bacteria in relation to the total bacterial load in the given sample. Depending on the proportion of lactobacilli and opportunistic bacteria in relation to total bacterial load, 3 types of vaginal microbiota were identified. The first one was nomocenosis. It's a normal state of vaginal microbiota when the proportion of lactobacilli was more than 80% of the total bacterial load. The second one is apparent dysbiosis. It's a variant of vaginal microbiota dominated with various opportunistic bacteria, and the proportion of lactobacilli is less than 20% of the total bacterial load. And the diverse microbial communities constitutes more than 80% of the total bacterial load. The third variant was moderate dysbiosis. It's an intermediate state of vaginal microbiota when the proportion of lactobacilli and opportunistic bacteria were more than 20%, but less than 80% of the total bacterial load. And depending on the prevalence of a specific group of bacteria, we can identify 3 types of dysbiotic conditions: aerobic dysbiosis, anaerobic dysbiosis, and mixed dysbiosis. So, in our group of patients, nomocenosis was detected by real-time PCR in 20% of all cases. But in 8% of these cases, the quantity of genital mycoplasmas or candida species was more than 4 to 10 genome equivalents per milliliters. And we call this condition conditional nomocenosis. Different variants of dysbiosis were detected in 80% of patients with aerobic vaginitis. So, moderate dysbiosis was detected in 26% and apparent dysbiosis in 54% of all patients. But the criteria of moderate dysbiosis met only 5 samples, and 25 samples met the criteria of aerobic apparent dysbiosis. Therefore, aerobic dysbiosis was determined only in 9% of all patients with microscopic signs of aerobic vaginitis. 75 samples met the criteria of anaerobic moderate dysbiosis, and 131 samples met the criteria of anaerobic apparent dysbiosis. 8 samples met the criteria of mixed moderate dysbiosis, and 24 samples the criteria of mixed apparent dysbiosis. So, dysbiosis associated with predominance of obligate anaerobes in vaginal microbiota was determined in 71% of all women with aerobic vaginitis according to microscopic findings. Thank you for your attention.